Hello and welcome to a live Q&A with DW News here on Facebook. Here on YouTube. Absolutely wonderful to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Alex Forrest Whiting, and I promise things will improve after that little mistake.
And my name is Marcel Aburakia.
Yeah, and we are here to talk about one issue, which is why is India facing a diplomatic backlash? It's all to do with some allegations of Islamophobia that have gone outside India, and there have been big reactions in countries across the world, including the Gulf states and also Indonesia. So we're asking, why is that happening?
But not only that, we're also looking at the history almost and where India is going, because there have been several incidents over the past, some even dating back 40 years to 1992. We're looking at a hijab ban, we're looking at cow vigilantes and corona jihad. Now, this might all just seem to you as weird stuff with names almost that you don't really have a idea of what's actually happening there. We will clear all these things up with amazing guests.
Yeah, we've got great people. The first person is actually a DW correspondent, Nimisha Jeswal, and she was actually in Delhi as our correspondent there, so for DW for 3 years, and before that for various other organisations. So she really knows her stuff, and she's also reported on some of the issues that we will be talking about.
Now, it would be weird to talk about Islamophobia without having a Muslim journalist on, for instance, and we do it. His name is Alijan Jaffrey. He's a freelance journalist in India working for The Wire, Al Jazeera, the BBC, and many other companies. So it's great to have those two on, because I think it shows what's actually happening there. And we actually get a good glimpse of where India is going. But this is not just about me and you.
No.
It's also not just about the guests that we'll have on. This is also just as much about you guys, the community, because you have the chance to comment in the chat, ask us or the guest questions that may arise, and I'll be monitoring that. Please be nice to us.
Please be nice. No nasty
We're not looking for any trouble. So definitely do ask away. I will be monitoring those, writing them down, and asking whatever it needs to be asked.
Yeah, and just before we speak to Nimisha, let me just tell you where we are. So we are in a little studio here in Berlin at DW News. We call it the glass box because it literally is glass all around us. And we're looking out behind us onto the newsroom where journalists are very busy working on various stories from all across the world. But we are talking about India. So let me first of all introduce our DW correspondent, Nimisha Jeswal, and ask you, Nimisha, just explain what's happened here. I mean, why has there been this big backlash against India? What exactly has gone wrong for India?
Well, it all started almost 2 weeks ago when a BJP spokesperson, Nupur Sharma, went on a TV debate and made some comments that were seen as derogatory to Prophet Muhammad. Now, TV debates in India are famously virulent. They often turn into shouting matches, but this clearly crossed a red line and has sparked a massive reaction. There was another BJP official called Naveen Jindal who also tweeted something out, which was also seen as derogatory. He later deleted this tweet. There has been action taken against both. Jindal has been removed from the party, and Nupur Sharma has been suspended. And this was in reaction actually to many countries coming out, Muslim majority countries coming out and condemning this comment. The Gulf Cooperation Council has condemned it. The embassy, Kuwait and Iran and Qatar have called in their Indian ambassadors, and they have said that that India must officially apologize. Even in some countries like Kuwait, Indian products have been taken off the shelves. So even though the BJP itself has distanced itself, there is still a reaction.
Yeah, sorry, Nimisha, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but you were just talking about Kuwait, and we've actually got some pictures of Indian products being taken off the shelves of supermarkets, which hopefully we can see in a second. But it really does just go to show the extent of this, that they are removing products that are Indian so that people can't buy them because they were so angry about this. Hopefully we can see some of those pictures, but if not, I can tell you, I mean, they were literally covering up shelves with plastic. They were taking, oh, here we are, look, you can see putting, I don't know, poppadoms and all sorts of Indian products into trolleys, covering them up with plastic, preventing anyone from purchasing anything that was made in India as a very, very strong reaction to what has happened, which just goes to show the extent of all this. Nimisha, you've said that obviously the party, the BJP, have reacted quite firmly to this, but we also we saw a statement from the party's spokeswoman who was caught up in this. She was the one who, as you said, was involved in that debate, and I think we can see what she has said, because I'm interested in your reaction. Here it is. I have been attending TV debates for the past many days where our Maharadev was being insulted and disrespected continuously. It was mockingly being said that it is not shivling but a fountain. The shivling was also being ridiculed by comparing it to roadside signs and poles in Delhi. I could not tolerate this continuous insult and disrespect towards our Mahadev, and I said some things in response to it. If my words have caused discomfort or hurt religious feelings or anyone whatsoever, I hereby unconditionally withdraw my statement. It was never my intention to hurt anyone's religious feelings. I'd just love to know your reaction to that, because is that an apology?
Well, over there, you can clearly see Sharma's attempt to make this about an emotional response as a Hindu, which can appeal at least to those supporters of the BJP who very much agree with this sentiment. However, of course, when the party itself has condemned her actions, some even tried to distance her and called her a fringe element, even though she is a spokesperson of the BJP. But there is clearly a need to also not directly apologize, perhaps. Now, of course, this is about the international reaction, but this is by far not the first time there has been Islamophobia on Indian television or even by BJP spokespersons. What is interesting here is that the red line that's been crossed of actually saying something derogatory, allegedly, about the Prophet. And even Gulf countries, for example, are important trade partners of India. About $87 billion of trade happened between the Gulf and India between 2020 and 21 last year, for example, and they also want to be careful about managing any reaction. But given that the public in these countries has reacted so strongly, the countries themselves have also had to take action.
Now, we will get right back to that question, but I'd first like to welcome all the other maybe viewers that just came in a little late to this show. My name is Marcel Aburakia. This is my dear colleague
Alex Forrest Whiting.
Exactly.
So you didn't have to say it.
I wanted to say it, but I mean, you came fast. And we're talking today, discussing the latest incident coming out of India. Allegedly, there were Islamophobic comments made by members of the ruling party. Both of them were suspended, and we are trying to look at where these comments are coming from, what the history is, but then also where India and perhaps the Muslim community is going from here. Now, Nimisha, I just wanted to add to that. How is the reaction this time around different to these other incidents that I had mentioned? There was a hijab ban. There were cow vigilantes, so mobs roaming the streets, attacking mostly Muslim people. How is it this time different? Because in general, it's still, in a way, if we understand it as that, Islamophobic.
Well, absolutely. That is what makes this instance interesting, especially because when it comes to international condemnation, especially from important trade partners and strategic partners like the Gulf Cooperation Council, it has so far been lacking despite this history of rising Islamophobic comments and actions and attacks. And even these, we can divide them into two broad categories. You know, there are the people who are coming out and attacking Muslims. There are mob lynchings of people accused of eating beef. There are horrific videos of people being forced to chant Hindu chants and Hindu religious incantations. And these people are Muslims, and they're told to go back to Pakistan, as this is something which is often used by Hindu mobs. But on the other side, there is an absolute silence usually from the state when it comes to these Islamophobic incidents. And in addition, there's also a structural issue. There are laws and policies that the BJP has strategically implemented over its last 8 years in power, which actually target Muslims in a way. There was a citizenship amendment law which made religion a test of citizenship for the first time. The protests against those were quashed as those being carried out by traitors. There was also the removal of Kashmir's special status, which is the only Muslim majority state in the country. So there is a history, of course, over the last few years, especially of rising Islamophobia, but such a reaction is perhaps focused on that red line being crossed of seemingly insulting the Prophet.
Yeah, thank you, Nimisha, because that was a whole load of stuff that you said there, some big examples, and we'll come back to some of them in a moment. But one of them I just wanted to talk about that Marcel mentioned, which is this ban on the hijab. We know that's just happened in one of the states. We're going to just first of all watch a report that was done earlier this year. It was done in February by DW News. So it was before there was a High Court ruling putting in place this ban. But let's just watch the report and then we can talk about it off the back, if that's okay, Nimisha, and you can just explain where we've got to with this and what happens next, because it sounds like this whole issue is only growing in India. Let's watch the report.
Fatima and Gausia, friends from the same village, are going to their college after a gap of a few days. The state government shut their college in Mangalore, along with other colleges in the state of Karnataka, for a week. The reason? A controversy involving hijabs. The situation escalated in nearby Udupi, known as the temple town of the south. There, a college banned the hijab. That caused a standoff between those who defended their right to wear the hijab and others who opposed allowing it inside an educational institution. As tensions flared, the protests, both anti and pro-hijab, spilled over to other parts of India. This is the government pre-university college where allegations of denying entry to girls in hijabs first surfaced. The principal here and the state's education minister blame a certain student organization for instigating the issue and the students here to protest against the dress code they had otherwise always followed. Both Fatima and Gausia call the ban unfair and discriminatory. They say the hijab is a part of their faith in a country where Muslims are often targeted.
If you cut off one of your finger or one of your limbs, how you feel? I can feel if I remove my hijab, I feel the same.
It is a simple cloth, it doesn't harm anyone, but people have made a mountain out of a molehill and turned the hijab into an international issue.
Prakash Kukehali represents a Hindu right-wing group. He says the hijab does not belong inside schools. Reports say the group helped organize the recent protests across the state, a charge he denies.
According to our religious texts, there should be no differentiation between Hindus, Muslims or Christians. They should all get the same education. But it's not just a question of a hijab. By wearing that, they just want to differentiate their identity and appearance from Hindus.
Tensions are running high in Udupi, and opinions over the issue are divided.
We feel safe when we wear the hijab, so we should be allowed to. Our religion also asks the same of us.
This was a small issue to begin with. This has now turned into a political game because next year there are state elections. All students are equal in a school. They should not bring their religion inside.
Schools and colleges have now reopened amidst a huge presence of the police and the media. With exams looming, students say they can't afford to miss any more classes. But the issue, as every girl wearing the hijab here knows, is far from being resolved.
So, Nimisha, I mean, we know it's far from being resolved because this is still ongoing, isn't it?
Well, yes, definitely. Even though the High Court of Karnataka, the state in question, did uphold this ban because it basically said that it does not see the hijab as an essential practice of Islam. Essential practices are protected. On the other hand, the girls who actually filed this case have taken it up to the Supreme Court, but there isn't a ruling as of now. Now, of course, Hindu groups have actually also suggested that they may ask for a wider ban such as this one. But the freedom to practice religion is protected in India generally. And one of the most interesting examples that people have continuously been pointing out about this particular ban is that the chief minister or the head of the state of Uttar Pradesh goes by Yogi Adityanath, is a man who is a priest who is always wearing orange robes. But that high office is all right. But for these girls looking to get an education, it is not, which is a clear instance of the kind of issues we have been discussing.
Now, we do have a comment from you guys out there that I want to just throw your way. Krishan Kant has commented, this kind of politics has led to more polarization in India. Would you agree? Is that, for instance, the hijab ban, is that the result of previous politics, or is it just one step further along the lines?
I think it is a continuing narrative. There is definitely more polarization that we have seen in India over the last decade, especially. And often this is tied to Prime Minister Narendra Modi coming to power in 2014, because we saw a clear uptick in hate speeches. We saw a clear uptick in violent attacks connected to beef consumption. And there's also been a clear uptick in just this kind of rhetoric. And of course, even the Muslim colleagues as well as other Muslims that we speak to have said that they have felt increasingly unsafe. Incidences like these are also interesting because for decades now, India has had people wearing hijabs. India has had people eating beef. It is not true that no Indians eat beef. Yet these things coming to the limelight in this fashion is a reassertion of the need to establish a Hindu nation when, in fact, the constitution says India is secular.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And we will actually be speaking to Alishan Jaffrey, who is a Muslim journalist working out of India, a little bit later after we've had a chat. But be very interesting to get his take on what it's like being a Muslim journalist working in India at the moment. Just some of these things that we were talking about there, about the eating beef, and you mentioned it before. You talked about lynching. You talked about the Citizenship Amendment law. I mean, it sounds like there's just been this catalogue of laws and issues that have just been coming up since, I guess, 2014 or so, probably before then. But has it sort of reached a crisis point now, would you say?
Many would argue that this crisis point was reached a long time ago. Many were surprised that that crisis point was not acknowledged when Prime Minister Narendra Modi was voted back with an overwhelming majority in 2019, which is his second term, which started his second term in power. But what is also important to note here is that we can't simply only say that the BJP is responsible for all Islamophobia in the country, because they are in power as a consequence of a wide base of support. Prime Minister Narendra Modi does enjoy immense popularity, and the narrative of establishing a Hindu nation, even if it is indirect, even if it is us versus them that is disguised in dog whistles rather than an actual statement saying as much. The actual statements always say that India is a country for all its religions. But the fact that there has been this overwhelming support really shows that, unfortunately, there is a popular sentiment. It's very interesting to especially point out that when Prime Minister Modi won his second term, he basically said that secularism is a toxic word, is a dirty word that must be removed. That is one of the most direct references that have been made by senior party leadership about how secularism in India is viewed. It is often equated now to appeasement politics or the support for Muslims at the cost of Hindus. And this is very much the us versus them narrative that I have been speaking about and that we have been seeing in all of this coverage, as well as the kind of rising instances of Islamophobia that we are seeing in India.
And I just want to pick up on one thing you said. It's us versus them. Now it seems it's India versus a tenfold of mostly majority Muslim countries. And I wanted to, it's a comment from the chat made by Lahaf Zaken. How is this international response going to affect India? What's coming for India? Is it a boycott? Is it a politics change? Is it maybe toppling the current regime politics even there? What's coming for India is what the question.
Well, when it comes specifically to the international condemnation, my view would be that not much is expected to change, pessimistic as that may sound. But it is important to note that this international condemnation stands out as an isolated almost incident as compared to many of the other things that I have been talking about. To look specifically, for example, at the GCC, at the Gulf countries, they always make it a point to leave each country's internal affairs as internal affairs. So this, and all these other instances of hateful actions or speech against Muslims that I have spoken about are left alone because India is supposed to take care of its own people and its own minorities as well. But when it came to crossing this red line, there has been condemnation, there has been calls for an official apology. So when it comes to a reaction, at most perhaps there could be an apology that is worded more like an apology than the ones that we have seen so far. But there isn't expected to be a policy change because in the past as well, for example, the United States releases international religious freedom reports, and it has often criticized India, including very recently. But India just dismisses these reports, says that these are targeting India, these are anti-India, and they do not take them seriously at all. So it's also about which strategic partner or which economic partner is saying what, how much do we need to concede? Because even for the Gulf, it is important for them to maintain good relations with India because of trade, because of millions of migrant workers who go and work in the Gulf. And for India, those workers send back remittances. So this is a relationship both sides want to maintain. This is probably something that will be soon enough swept under the rug.
Thank you very much. And Nimisha, just stay with us. But if you are joining us, you are watching a live Q&A with DW News on YouTube. And we are just speaking to our correspondent, Nimisha Jeswal, and we are asking her about the reasons behind India facing this big diplomatic backlash that we have seen over the past few days. For example, in the Gulf, as she was just talking about, Indonesia, other countries too, and that is what we are trying to get to the bottom of. But we've also been looking at what's gone on in India before, why there are accusations of Islamophobia and what is behind that. And Nimisha has just been talking about some of the issues and some of the examples that she has also reported on. And Nimisha, I just wanted to talk to you about another issue that you have also talked about before, and you did a report for DW News back in August, and that is this whole issue of sacred lands for Hindus where mosques are currently standing. We'll watch your piece in a moment, but can you just give us a bit of an introduction to that and why that has become such a big issue?
Well, when it comes to contested lands, what we are focusing on in the piece that I did last August was on a mosque in the holy city of Varanasi, considered very holy for Hindus, that is contested because there are claims from Hindu petitioners saying that that mosque was built on after destroying a temple, and they would like to continue praying there and perhaps even construct a Hindu temple in its stead. However, this is not unprecedented or not isolated. A similar incident decades ago was a flashpoint and almost a key agenda of the BJP to build a temple at a contested site where a mosque was raised in the 90s. The Supreme Court went on 30 years later to actually grant permission for that temple to be built. And this is why another mosque controversy is something which India is watching very closely.
So very controversial. Before we go further, let's just watch that report that you did back in August.
The city of Varanasi is one of Hinduism's holiest sites. Every year, millions of pilgrims flock to the temple town to offer prayers and to wash away their sins. But the city is also home to a simmering dispute between India's two largest religions. Local Hindu lawyer Vijay Shankar Rastogi is on a mission to reverse what he considers the ultimate sin. He says a mosque was built here after tearing down an ancient Hindu temple. For 3 decades now, he has been filing petitions demanding the land be restored to the Hindus. Now, he has filed a fresh plea for an archaeological survey to find proof of the buried temple. Rastogi believes the Hindu Lord Shiva himself chose this holy place, and that a mosque has no right to stand there.
The Muslims have destroyed this blessed site. They destroyed the temple to establish their own religion and built a mosque on top of it. I filed this public interest suit on behalf of all Hindus of this country against all the Muslims.
Rastogi's allegations are not unique. A spate of similar cases have recently been filed against mosques across the state, based on claims that they were built after destroying temples on their locations. A recent Supreme Court verdict may have encouraged them. Just 200 kilometers from this mosque under question, another controversial mosque in a city called Ayodhya was torn down by Hindu mobs. After 30 years in court, the contested land was awarded to the Hindus. The verdict on Ayodhya's Babri Mosque raised worries about the future of minority rights in India. But at the same time, the top court ruled that a 1991 law that protects all places of worship should be upheld in all other cases. Under that law, if a mosque, like this one in Varanasi, existed on the day of India's independence in 1947, it has the right to stand. SM Yassin, a member of the Varanasi Mosques Committee, says this is the Muslim side's main defense. But now, even this law is being challenged in court. Yassin says there would be a flood of similar cases without this law, providing fresh fuel to historic animosity.
We accepted the Babri Mosque verdict with heavy hearts, hoping there wouldn't be fresh trouble in the future. But if they are insistent on filing cases, we'll fight them too. These petitioners just want fame. They want to incite religious tensions. It is their job to spread hate between Hindus and Muslims. No good can come of this.
Hindus here revere the temple that was built near the contested site. But many are offended by the presence of the towering mosque beside it. Almost a third of Varanasi's population is Muslim, so opinions on the dispute are divided.
If people have been offering prayers at the mosque since before independence, disputing it is not right. It will disrupt the peace in the country.
There is a mosque in place of the temple right now. If the mosque is removed, the people will be happy, we'll be more comfortable.
Although it was almost 3 decades ago, memories of the Hindu-Muslim riots around the Ayodhya case are still fresh in the minds of many here in India. The hope this time is that these disputes will be resolved in the courts.
And Namisha, do you think they will be resolved in the courts? Because it looks like, I mean, this could just go on and on and on.
Law that protects these places of worship is struck down eventually, there will be a flood of court cases, and that is a best-case scenario because massive riots did break out when the last such demolition took place. But even the BJP itself has said in all these mosque challenges that let the courts decide. Of course, the court has decided in the favor of the Hindu side in the past.
Now, again, this is just about us, the guests, as it is about the community, and they have been asking away. One thing in particular, I'll just summarize it. These are comments from Karam Bhatia, Garaf Washish, and Bharat. They're basically saying, in Western countries, there are partial bans of hijabs, but why are you now out of nowhere complaining? You are doing the same thing as we are. Where are maybe the differences that we can make out from Western hijab bans to the one we see in India?
Well, when it comes to the perspective from within India, itself, which is what I would focus on, the fact that is being pointed out as problematic is that these are fresh questions, fresh charges, and these challenges are not protected by the law as of now. So even, for example, when the High Court weighed in saying the hijab is not an essential practice, many opposed to that ruling, including the lawyers, said it is not the place of the High Court to make that call, to make that decision. Under Indian law, it is a protected practice, and Muslims are protected. Every religion is protected in practicing its religion, in freely practicing and offering prayer as well. So, of course, the key difference here is that these are not mandates by law. This often starts as harassment. These girls were just blocked from going into the schools, then they appeal to the courts. There are similar instances of harassment we're seeing across the country, and these are not protected by law. It is taking the law into their own hands, which is the challenge and the problem here.
Nimisha, thank you so much. You have been really enlightening on this whole subject. Please stay with us. We don't want you to go away. But we are now going to speak to our next guest, and his name is Alishan Jaffrey. He is a freelance journalist who is working for a number of organisations, including Wire, Al Jazeera, the BBC, I could go on. But what's interesting about Alishan is that he is a Muslim journalist, a Muslim and a journalist. So I just want to, well, first of all, welcome you to our YouTube Live. Very, very kind of you to speak to us this evening from Delhi. I just would like to ask you, first of all, what is it like at the moment being a Muslim in India?
I'd just like to begin from the last question that was asked to the previous speaker about partial bans on religious practices such as hijab in Western countries. It's very different in India than it is in a country like France, for example. You are saying that why can't we have the French model of secularism in India? In India, the school is described as Vidya Ka Mandir, which essentially means temples of education. And these are places where the Hindu religious practices are quite normalized. And when you're banning one religion as a religion while allowing the majority religion as culture, it's just hypocrisy. And I think your question that what does it mean to be a Muslim in India, I'll just summarize it for you. In the past 8 years, you have seen, if we go year by year, we have seen from 2014 to 16 violence against Muslims in the name of in the pretext of Muslims being involved in the illicit trade of beef, and we have seen dozens of lynchings of Muslim men on that pretext. After that came the love jihad laws, where Muslim men marrying Hindu women was termed as a conspiracy. By 2019 and 2020, there were citizenship protests in India, and suddenly a section of the Hindu right wing started referring to Muslims as illegal citizens who have migrated from the neighboring country of Bangladesh. And in 2022, you see open call for genocides almost now being made on a weekly basis against Muslims. And the people who are making these calls are doing this with impunity. Being a journalist, it's really tough in India to, measure your words. If you ask me, just last week, a journalist was booked in a case for calling a person, a respected Hindu priest, a hate monger, because that person had publicly incited mass rape of Muslim women and murder of Muslim men. But the journalist who just called him a hate monger was booked in a case. So that's what it means to be a Muslim in India right now, according to me.
And I just want to pick up on one thing you just said there. You said open calls for genocide. Can you expand on that? What do you mean by that?
Just 2 years ago, we heard slogans like "shoot the traitors of the nation." When Muslims protested this slogan, it was said that we are not talking about Muslims, we are talking about traitors. 2 years, fast forward 2 years, we have a slogan like, when Muslims will be killed, they will shout the name of Ram. So it's explicit, and now the traitors, the nation has been replaced by a Hindu religious figure, and the traitors have been replaced by Muslims. And this slogan is now raised, it's raised by BJP leaders, it's raised by people who are close to the BJP. And just in December, a massive religious event in the state of Uttarakhand took place where there were open calls for exterminating Muslims, and such calls have now become very common in the last 6 months, I would say. At that conference, one person specifically said that if we kill 2 million Muslims, if we raise 100 militants who can kill 2 million Muslims, then we can convert India into a Hindu nation. That's the kind of calls that are being now made on a routine basis. And the people who are making these calls, there has hardly been any action. If they are arrested after massive outrage by Muslims and by progressive activists, then they're let off on bail in a matter of weeks.
Sorry, just one thing then. Just with what you were saying, I mean, I was going to say, do you feel that Muslims are being treated as second-class citizens? But what you're saying is obviously sounds much more serious than that.
Of course, the question, in one state, there is a protest against Muslims, how Muslims pray. In another state, there's a protest against what Muslims wear. In another state, there's a protest against what Muslims eat. So you are attacking essentially, in another state, there's an attack on the language that Muslims speak in India. So you are essentially attacking every aspect of the Muslim life in India. You are now seeing bulldozers being used in the name of clearing, of course, illegal encroachment against Muslims. And if you put all these things in context, if you add all these things together, what you see is that there's an all-out attack against Muslims, and that's of course very choking.
Now, I wanna ask you, from your experience of growing up in India, how has the expression of Islamophobic comments, for instance, in the middle of the society changed over time? We had just had Nimisha on, and she said definitely 2014 was one turning point. Before that, how was life for Muslims? Were there similar resentments, or has it changed ever since 2014?
I would just like to say that before 2014, there have been massive riots, anti-Muslim riots in India. There has been tension. But this episodic violence where one kind of violence ends and you come up with something else, where on some day Muslim food is being discussed, the cuisine of Muslims is being discussed, and on some other day there's a campaign to change the name of a city because it was supposedly built by a so-called Muslim invader. So the focus on the Muslim life in India is such that it's now very common to use anti-Muslim slurs on social media and to abuse people who happen to be Muslim. And just a few days back, a Jain minority man who was not a Muslim was murdered, and his attackers had the excuse that we mistook him for being a Muslim. So it's something that's very choking because, when lynchings and violence against Muslims on one hand is becoming routine, the state is not stepping up to take action and to put an end to the impunity of the perpetrators. And this is basically happening because non-state actors and extremists who incite the Hindu right wing to commit violence and stoke hatred against Muslims is not being reined in by the government.
Now, you just mentioned the government, and I want to confront you with one of the comments that has been made by Yogi Rathod. He says, I don't agree with the BJP. The problem is that our opposition parties are weak. Is that true? Is that the current situation, that the opposition is too weak to properly change politics, perhaps in favor of the Muslim minority?
So, see, the thing is that the kind of anti-Muslim environment that exists in India right now, if you just go to the Twitter timeline of India's principal opposition leader, who is Mr. Rahul Gandhi, and he's somebody who speaks about unity, about love. And if you look at his timeline and search the word Muslim and see how many times he has used the word Muslim in the last 7 or 8 years, you'll be surprised to find that he has not even used it a dozen times. And that's how much extreme Islamophobia is in India right now, because the moment the opposition speaks for Muslims, the moment they utter a word in solidarity for Muslims, they are termed as anti-Hindu. And even during this recent controversy that just spread out all over the world, no opposition leader in India, opposition leader who's popular and who's from the majority community, has come out and said that what is happening to Muslims is wrong and it's something unacceptable, and you need to stop the anti-Muslim hatred.
Just to remind people who are watching or who are perhaps just joining us now that you are watching a live Q&A from DW News here on YouTube, and we have been talking about why is India facing a diplomatic backlash, and that was to do with some comments made by two people who were working for the main party, the BJP, one in a debate that was considered Islamophobic and one in a tweet. Now, both those people, the party say, have been dealt with. One has been, I think, kicked out of the party, actually, and one has been suspended. But we're now broadening it out and talking generally about what it's like being a Muslim in India. Is there Islamophobia? And what has happened over the past few years, particularly since the BJP and Prime Minister Modi took power in 2014. And I'm speaking to an Indian journalist, Alishan Jaffrey, who is also Muslim himself. So we are asking him specific questions, particularly as he will be feeling it. You must be feeling it yourself. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was about being a journalist and covering some of these events. I mean, just for you yourself, how does it feel? I know you're in Delhi, but do you feel you're in the right city? Is that the safest city for you?
I think as somebody who has more privilege than the average Indian Muslim reporter who's reporting on things like these, I would say that I am still in a security bubble. I am safe. I feel safe compared to what my colleagues and what people who are reporting from very remote areas in India are facing. But on the other hand, it's very normal for even journalists like me or the journalists who just exposed this TV debate on Twitter. On one hand, the government is telling the world that these people who have made these Islamophobic comments are fringe elements. But on the other hand, since the last 4 days, there have been social media campaigns calling for the arrest of Mohammad Zubair, who's a journalist who exposed this. And you would be surprised to if you just go through his Twitter timeline and see the kind of comments under his tweets. He's getting death threats. He's getting threats against his family, and it's just so normal because that's what journalists who do their job and who are reporting the truth are facing right now. And while the world is being told that these leaders have been suspended and a strict action has been taken against them, the sentiment within the core supporters of the ruling party is that these people are actually victims of the global Muslim lobby, and that they are victims, and therefore they should be, they should get a lot of solidarity from within the Hindu right.
Now, I want to pick up on two things. One, I want to encourage the chat again to comment and ask away. Alijan is here for another couple of minutes, so this is your chance to really ask him what the situation maybe is like now in India. And there's another thing I wanted to mention. I wanted to bring up the issue of Kashmir. Modi, the current president, has made that almost like his own special project. When he came in power, he said, I'm going to take this under my hands. And he's really cracked down on several issues in Kashmir. Can you maybe take us there and explain what the situation is like?
In the last few months, there have been acts of violence against the Hindu minority in Kashmir and also against Muslims residing in Kashmir. And many journalists have reported about it. And, you don't get a lot of information from Kashmir. And just today, there was this journalist, Shahid Tantare, who came out on Twitter and alleged that he's facing harassment for his reportage. So, of course, the situation there is not, it's not something like what we are facing elsewhere in other Indian states. And it's of course, very terrible because acts of violence against a minority community happening right now, it's terrible, and the government should have contained this violence, and it has failed to do that.
Yeah. And another thing that we need to mention is that there was it's called internet blackout almost, the longest in the history of any democracy in the world. So clearly the communication paths have been cut off in the past. Again, the chat, there have been questions. Many of them are, let's say, unsure of where is India going from here. And I want to throw a question to you, Alijan. Where is India going from here? And maybe especially for the Muslim community, where is the Muslim community in India going from here?
I think Muslims in India, compared to how Muslims just a few years back were feeling, they are now more expressive. Now they have developed a vocabulary in which, using which they can respond, and they now know how to communicate their problems and issues to both the government and to the outer world. And this is something that was not there. Earlier, when Muslims were being attacked just 2 or 3 years ago, they did not have the language to respond, and also not the kind of mobilization on social media and also on the ground to be even able to tell the world that what they're facing. And things in that sense have improved. But on the other hand, the kind of violence that you see growing on the other side of the fence, where there are explicit calls for genocide, the government, of course, should step up and take action against non-state actors. And I think, to my mind, the government has not taken adequate action against these people who have been stoking hatred against Muslims for quite a long time.
So do you think then that given this diplomatic spat that has erupted over the past few days, do you think anything will change? Do you think now that countries will be looking more closely at India, or is this just a flash in the pan and things will continue as usual?
I think it is too early for me to come to a conclusion whether things will change or not. But what has certainly happened for the first time, that the world has taken a serious notice of the rampant hate speech against Muslims in India. And this was just something that just blew out of proportion. And but back at home, things do not look very promising, because while the outer world is being told that we are doing a course correction, the BJP has told its leaders that you cannot, go on TV debates and say outrageous things and give hate speeches. You need to follow a code of conduct. But on the other hand, even after this incident, there have been instances of direct call for violence against Muslims. And if you just go through the social media, how the alt-right in India has responded to this international outrage and this whole episode, it's worrying, because it just signals that Muslims have done something that has brought shame to the country, which is, and in fact, it's just the other way around, because Muslims have done nothing. They were just talking to their government for the last 10 days, and they were telling their government that, you should respond. But the government chose to only respond when the international community, specifically these Muslim nations, told the government that comments against Prophet Muhammad is unacceptable.
Thank you very much for your time, Alishan. Really, really appreciate it. Fascinating to hear what it's like actually on the ground there, what it's like for you as a Muslim, also as a journalist, and to take to hear your take on what's going to happen moving forward, which sounds like, well, you said too early to say, but it sounds like you're possibly not holding your breath. But thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate that. I'd like to now just go back to our correspondent, That is Nimisha, who has been with us throughout. You are watching, by the way, a DW News Live on YouTube, a Q&A, and we're talking about why India has been facing a diplomatic backlash, and we've broadened it out and talked about generally what's going on with India and with these allegations of Islamophobia, and have heard some quite extraordinary things, actually, I have to say, in terms of what is going on. So let me just ask you, Nimisha, do you think, just like we asked Alishan, do you think that things will change? What is India looking like, and will it change because of what's happened over the past few days?
Well, even as Alishan said, that it is too early to say anything about the change that may or may not come, I actually don't think, unfortunately, that we are likely to see much change in India, because, as we have discussed during this dialogue, that there is a majority support of the kind of policies that the BJP has been supporting, of the kind of hate speech and violence that we've seen on the ground. There is a tacit nod almost, or there is the silence of some kind of condoning of this kind of violence and this kind of action. And unfortunately, even while there are laws that technically protect Muslims, it is the abuse of other laws, like what Alishan pointed out, that are actually used to question Muslims, to ask them, are you an illegal immigrant? Did you legally build this structure? So it is also about how well existing protections are used, or in some cases abused. And that, unfortunately, I do not see that going away anytime soon.
Nimisha, thank you very much for being on here. Also, thank you very much to Alijan. Also, thank you to you for this lovely co-host. But also, thank you very much to the chat, to the community out there. You asked away, and I've loved the commitment that you had in the chat. And we'll see you soon on the next live stream here on DW News.